Okay, so yeah, this is our first panel. You can see the panel members to my right. I'm going to introduce them each before they give their prepared remarks. And then following that, I've asked them each to limit their prepared remarks to about 10 minutes or so, maybe less. And then we'll have plenty of time after that for Q&A. So I would encourage you, as they are talking, think about what they're saying and what you're hearing, and challenge them with some questions, because there'll be time for that at the end. And there's some comment cards, I think, on each row in the end chair. And if you need more, just raise your hand and holler, and we'll get you the question cards. But do give that some thought. That's usually the best part of these panels. As you heard, the topic of our panel is transforming the future of sustainment through innovation and technology. We have a great panel here to stimulate some thought and discussion about that. That's what this day is all about today, is thought and discussion. As General McGee was talking, I've already got about a half a dozen things I want to follow up on with him and other people separately, and as the day goes on, I think my list is going to get longer, and I encourage you to do the same thing. But first up, to my right, Major General Paul Hurley. General Hurley assumed command of the Combined Arms Support Command just a few weeks ago on the 31st of May. And as such, as you know, and those of you who in the audience are not familiar with CASCOM, General Hurley is responsible for institutional training and doctrine development for all sustainment personnel in the Army. That's logistics, MOSs, and ordnance, quartermaster transportation, as well as personnel, finance, and even has an integration responsibility for medical, JAG, and there's one other that I can't think of off the top of my head. General Hurley was commissioned through the ROTC program at Texas A&M University in 1986. He holds 2 master's degrees. His previous general officer assignments include being commanding general of the 1st Theater Sustainment Command, supporting CENTCOM, G4 of Army Forces Command, J4 of United States Forces Korea, and commanding general of the 19th Expeditionary Sustainment Command, also in Korea. I can't think of anybody better qualified to kick off our panel. General Hurley. Next chart.
Is this on? What button did you push? That one. Okay. All right, I'm up.
Next chart.
So I thought it'd be the first thing to do. I thought it would be helpful to kind of rehash the multi-domain battle characteristics from a sustainment perspective. So no longer can we assume that the United States is going to have uncontested dominance in all of the domains: land, air, space, maritime, and cyber. And I had the pleasure of spending a couple days with our Israeli counterparts, and they would add another domain here that I hadn't previously considered, and that's subterranean as well. Increasing lethality on the battlefield, General Peggy mentioned that, but in an environment where our comparative military advantage is either slim or non-existent, we'll fight with our capabilities degraded, and we'll fight outmanned, outgunned, outranged. So what I want you to take away from the characteristics is, if you can be seen, you can be targeted. And if you can be targeted, you will be killed. That's the environment that we have to operate in. So the sustainment challenge is to develop a force that is trained and equipped to operate semi-independently in an expeditionary environment over extended periods of time, and our stretch goal is 7 days without resupply, in a degraded operational environment against a peer competitor. So on the left side of the charts, you'll see our CASCOM sustaining multi-domain battle lines of effort, and what I'd like to do is spend a little time on the right side, which is our key CASCOM science and technology priorities. The first one I'll cover, it's been covered a little bit today, is autonomous resupply. So the goal, obviously, for autonomous resupply is to extend the operational reach, mitigate human endurance constraints, and decrease the man distribution requirements. Some of the initiatives we have in this regard are to look at leader-follower technology, where you have a manned truck in the front and then several unmanned autonomous vehicles behind, and the leader leads and the trucks follow, therefore minimizing the amount of manpower you have to have out there on the battlefield. And then additionally, we're looking at fully autonomous aerial and ground resupply. We've already used Amazon as an example. So if Amazon can use UAVs to deliver products, So can we. I'd like to talk next about point of need supply. The goal there would be to reduce demand and the logistics footprint through point of need production, reuse, or other efficiencies. I'll talk about three things real quick. Alternative sources of water. Obviously, that's technology that would be designed to produce or reuse water on site. The initiatives we have there are air-to-water technology, man-portable water purification technology, and gray water reuse technology. Interesting tidbit. Until I started researching this, what I didn't understand is that BCTs don't necessarily have the capacity or the capability to distribute 95% of their water requirements or reuse 75% of their water requirements. So any emerging technology in this area is huge to reduce our footprint. The next I'll talk about alternative sources of fuel, and a couple examples of this is advanced power generation technology to use less fuel, hydrogen power technology, hybrid electric technology and microgrids, and renewable energy like solar and wind technology. And the last, what I'd like to talk about also is additive manufacturing or 3D printing. And for those of you dinosaurs who are listening, who really don't understand what that is, it's really the process of making three-dimensional solid objects from a digital model using an additive process where successive layers of material are laid down to form different solid shapes. Now that gives us the technology, and this technology exists. And in fact, we're having to think of policy implications of this technology because of the proliferation and the ability of some of our units to really use this well. But it provides the capability of manufacture Class 9 on site, and it gives us the potential of manufacturing those parts that we need and eliminating the supply chain, which is a revolutionary change to the way we do business now. And we also have emerging uses for medical purposes as well. The enabled mission command, obviously we talked about G-Army. That's huge, getting all of our logistics functional areas under one ERP or logistics information system where you create a shared understanding through a log cop and you don't have a bunch of boutique solutions layering on top of your one system that bogs it down and then provides latent information. And then we've got to have the ability. We've got to have the ability to operate in a joint and multinational environment, and that's got to be built into our STAMIS systems. For reducing our sustainment signature, I won't get into much there, except remember what I said earlier. If you can be seen, you can be targeted. And some of the largest EMS signatures on the battlefield come from either power generation or nipper use, both of which indicates log, or is a characteristic of a log footprint. And lastly, combat casualty care. Some of the significant science and technology advances we're working on are improved combat dressings, quick clot and HEMCON and other like technologies. Synthetic blood to reduce the demand for distribution of blood products is significant. And then one option would be, as an example, powdered blood, which I didn't realize that we could do yet, but it's an emerging technology. Spray on skin for burn treatments, and using improved technology to reduce the signatures of our care facilities in terms of power generation and microgrids and water as well. So with that, sir, if I have any time left, I'll cede it over to the next briefer.
Thanks, Mark. Some pretty...
Paul. There was a Mark Hurley out there.
Now, there's actually going to be a Mark after Paul, but some pretty heavy thoughts there on that chart. Again, I would encourage you to challenge General Hurley on some of the things that he's saying that we are going to focus on, because there's certainly some things there worth discussing. Our next speaker is Mr. Mark Holifield. Mr. Holifield is the Executive Vice President of Supply Chain and Product Development at the Home Depot, so a real treat for us to have a senior member from industry here on our panel. Mr. Holifield is responsible for the company's logistics, distribution, delivery, transportation, and inventory planning and replenishment operations, as well as brand and product development. Kind of sounds familiar to this audience, I would think. At least most of that stuff does. During his tenure with the company, he has engineered one of the largest and most dramatic supply chain transformations in retail history. Mark has more than 30 years of experience in a fast-paced, high-volume retail supply chain management business. And we welcome him, Mr. Holifield.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you all to our service members for your service to our country, protecting our freedom and our ability to operate here. I've got a slide up there just kind of outlining a background on the Home Depot. Many of you are probably familiar with our stores. We have 2,000 stores across the United States, Canada, and Mexico. We define ourselves in terms of our goal right now in sales, which is to get to $101 billion in sales by 2018, the end of next year, and we're on track to achieve that. Our key enablers to make that happen really are the things below on the chart, and you see there our culture. The greatest thing our founders gave us was really the culture that drives all of the value in the Home Depot. Our founders set a few guiding principles for us. There's 8 values there on that value wheel. They include excellent customer service, creating shareholder value, doing the right thing, giving back to our communities, and such. And they really are the rules of engagement that we use to make sure that we're cohesive as a team and delivering on our goals together. We believe strongly in the concept of the inverted pyramid, and what that means is our customers at the very top of that pyramid, our CEO is at the bottom. In between there, we have immediately underneath the customers on that inverted pyramid are our frontline associates in the stores, the folks you've seen with orange aprons on if you visit Home Depot stores. The middle management in there, and then the senior leadership, and then at the bottom, our CEO. And what this really helps us to do is to help understand that we win or lose based upon the interactions that take place with our customers, and our associates there on the floor of our stores are the people that make us successful or not. And I've heard military leaders talk about how even the greatest strategies, it all comes down to an 18-year-old with a rifle in many cases. Our strategy is really, we borrowed a page from Jim Collins' book, Good to Great, and we think about our strategy in terms of a 3-legged stool with a seat on top. The first question we ask ourselves in developing our strategy is, what are we passionate about? We're passionate about taking care of our customers in the stores every day. That's what gets us up in the morning. That's what keeps us there, is really taking care of customers. The second question we ask ourselves is, what can we be best in the world at? And at the Home Depot, we think we can be best in the world at product authority and home improvement, bringing the products that our customers need to market. The third question we ask ourselves is, what drives our economic engine? And what drives our economic engine today is different than it once was. At one time, driving the economic engine at Home Depot was opening new stores and new markets and really dotting the landscape with those stores. We've got enough stores now. We've got all the stores we need to serve the U.S. population for some time to come. What drives our economic engine today is productivity and efficiency, and making intelligent capital allocation decisions, disciplined capital allocation decisions on what we do with our money. It really has to do with returning capital to our shareholders, but also investing to continue our business. We've added the seat of the stool here, and today this is really where our multi-domain battle is occurring in retail. We call it interconnected retail. What pulls all of that together is interconnected retail. Retail is no longer defined by those bricks and mortar stores. It's really defined by serving our customers where, when, and how they wish to be served. And that interconnected retail, the store is a key part of that, but our online presence and our ability to deliver product to customers is very important there as well. We don't talk about e-commerce at Home Depot the way other retailers might, or omni-channel retail. We call it interconnected retail because we really see our stores as a place to draw customers in, and we might close that sale on the web. Or the web might be a place where we draw the customer in and close that sale in the store. So it really is tying together the force of our online presence and our stores to maximize value for our customers. Our promise to customers is convenience and value. How do we bring convenience to our customers, make things seamless and frictionless for our customers? And how do we drive value in their endeavors, whether they're a homeowner or they're a professional? Professional customers make up a big part of the Home Depot. We have about less than 10% of our customers are those folks with the pickup trucks with the ladders on it you see in the parking lots of our stores and that kind of thing. But they're 10% of our customers, but 40% of our sales. The average homeowner comes to the Home Depot about 4 times a year. The average pro customer comes to the Home Depot 52 times a year, at least. So those are the most important customers to us, and we really define ourselves by serving both of those, but we recognize how important that pro customer is. As we look at supply chain, I've just put a few key deliverables up there. When I was promoted to Senior Vice President Supply Chain back at Office Depot, where I was previous to Home Depot, and I called my wife and said, "Hey, honey, great news. I've been promoted, Senior Vice President Supply Chain." My wife says, "What is it you actually do? What can I tell the neighbors?" And what I thought for a moment, and I said, "Well, honey, what you can tell the neighbors is if they go to the local Office Depot store at the time and they can't find what they're looking for, it's probably my fault somehow." So the first job in supply chain we've defined here is really in stock. How do we be in stock for our customers, whether it's online for their delivery or in stock at the store? Next is inventory productivity. We have about $13 billion of inventory in the Home Depot. If I can make that inventory just a little bit more efficient, I can bring hundreds of millions of dollars into the checkbook as a result of that. But at the same time, I have to be in stock. The next deliverable is lowest logistics cost. That's how we bring great prices to our customers, by continuing to take cost out and bring our customers low cost. And then finally, service to our stores and customers. How do we take care of our customers? How do we take care of our internal customers who work in the store? There on that inverted pyramid. As you can see, these are a balance. Inventory and in-stock seem a little bit counter to each other. Low cost and high service, a little counter. So getting that balance right is really what the key is in our roles. The next chart here really, I'll just talk about three areas of our company that we're working on. First is our core supply chain. Getting that inventory to our stores and serving our customers in the stores with the product. We're taking a new look at the way we operate our supply chain. General Piggy talked about the stovepipes. Well, it's very much been a stovepipe in the past, where we have inventory management, making decisions about inventory, transportation, making decisions about moving that inventory to our stores and customers, the distribution, a point intervening in the flow of goods from our vendors to our stores, and then the stores themselves. And then we would make decisions about how that inventory flowed and how that was processed really in those stovepipes and silos. What we've realized is if we can put our supply chain in sync, supply chain synchronization, we can increase the speed of flow, increase our ability to deliver on those key deliverables that I talked about. This is taking technology, new distribution capabilities, new ways to look at our inventory ordering and management, a lot of data science that's going into that, putting in the right inventory management algorithms, and then synchronizing that flow from our manufacturer to our distribution centers to our stores, and making that work well. The second area I'll talk about is that interconnected retail area. Next chart. There we go. And this really has to do with delivering product directly to customers. We see, it is an asymmetrical battle for us right now, with us being a bricks and mortar retailer, long established, and pure play online retailers coming into our space. We need to make sure that we can deliver to our customers just as they do, and really leverage the benefit of our stores, but also bring those kinds of values to our customers as well. To do that, we're really developing a new network that allows us to look at inventory wherever it is, to look at all the transportation assets wherever they are, and how they link from our inventory holding points to our customers. Our delivery operations range from just a simple parcel moving to a customer's doorstep, all the way up to a couple of folks in a truck delivering a laundry pair, like a washer and dryer, unhooking that, hooking that back up. You know, there's a lot of talk about autonomous vehicles making deliveries. I've done a few appliance deliveries with our teams, and I can tell you it's going to be a while before you can get a robot to figure out how to turn off the laundry, turn off the washer, and do that without causing damage to a customer's home. But a lot of complexity in that. And then finally, we've got our Home Depot private brands. We have 8 brands that are over $1 billion in sales. It's our job to continue to develop these brands and make them relevant to our customers and really bring great product. I mentioned one of our key strategies is product authority. We have to bring products that bring great convenience and great value to our customers. We've developed new capabilities to develop our products. We have an innovation lab, a quality and engineering lab now in the basement of our corporate store support center, our headquarters. And there we tear down products. We look at each of the components. We understand what it costs to make those products. We understand how those products can be better. And we do that to really build these up. As I might have said, we have 8 billion, $1 billion brands. Hopefully you've heard of some of them, but that compares well, I think, with some of the consumer brands out there in the marketplace. So very much looking forward to your questions and appreciate the invitation again.
Thanks very much, Mark. And I can tell that you had the audience's interest. As I look out there, I actually see people's faces. I'm not looking at the tops of their heads as they're reading their iPhones. So very good, very good. Next up to Mark's right is Major General Al Shoffner. General Shoffner assumed duty as the Director of Operations, Army Rapid Capabilities Office in April of this year. In this role, General Shoffner serves as the critical link to enable the Army to expedite needed technologies to the field and to counter urgent and emerging threats. General Shoffner graduated from the United States Military Academy in 1988 and was commissioned a field artillery officer. Before his previous general officer assignments include serving as the Director of the Army Talent Management Task Force, the Deputy Chief of Staff Communications for the NATO Resolute Support Mission, the Deputy Chief of Staff G357 rather, Headquarters Army Training and Doctrine Command, and Deputy Commander for Support, 1st Armored Division, and Fort Bliss, Texas. General Shoffner.
Yeah, thanks, General Stevenson, and it's truly an honor to be here today. And just a safety briefing up front. As General Stevenson mentioned, I am not a loaded station, nor am I an acquisition expert. But I am attempting to help in both of those areas, and I think it's a really healthy dialogue we're taking part in today. A little bit about Rapid Capabilities Office before I jump into sustainment implications. Because we're new, I think it's important to talk a little bit about what we're for, what the Army Rapid Capability Office is for, and to put it in context, I would start the discussion this way. Over the past 15 years, the United States Army obviously has been focused on winning the current fight. And this is not a criticism of that, it's a statement of fact. But during that period of time, 2 fundamental things happened that I think have resulted in the situation we now face. The first is that in that period of time, our adversaries invested in technologies, and by doing so, gained a significant advantage in several different areas, and I'll talk about some of those here in just a second. And then the second factor is we're all keenly aware is that the rate of technological change has increased. So those two combined have left us with some severe capability gaps in some critical areas. So the Rapid Capabilities Office has been designed to help understand those gaps, articulate them, and then find solutions, mostly material solutions, that will help us close those gaps and eventually achieve dominance in those areas. What we really seek to do is not find the perfect solution. We're looking for something that's about an 80% solution that will give us a bridge, an interim capability until a program of record, an enduring program of record, could come online. So our initial mandate from the Secretary and the Chief was to close the capability gaps based on operational needs as expressed by commanders in the field, combatant commanders and other major commanders. Our initial focus area has been Europe. We are on track to provide initial prototypes for electronic warfare and what we call positioning, navigation, and timing in Europe later on this year. Our method is to use existing exercises and to put prototypes in the hands of soldiers during those exercises, and then to get feedback from those soldiers and have that feedback inform what we do. The big idea here is to place multiple small bets simultaneously without spending a whole lot of money, and be okay with some of those not working out, or perhaps none of them work out. The important thing is the result of that evaluation has got to inform what we do, and importantly to the acquisition process, inform the program of record. And so we actually are not working a separate sort of path necessarily, but we are working with the PEOs and the PMs. And in fact, a lot of the folks that do the work for the prototyping come from the PM shops. So we're not necessarily creating a standalone organization that's working in parallel. We're using the guys that actually are working on the programs of record, and in some cases pulling that capability, putting that capability in the field sooner. So when it comes to sustainment, I think with the Rapid Capabilities Office, we've got to strike a balance. We've got to be thorough, but we've also got to be streamlined. We are knowingly accepting some risk in this approach with rapid prototyping. We know that we will not have the level of detail that would come with a program of record. For example, we will not know the exact system density by echelon at the outset of a project. That's because the operational needs, operational assessments and soldier input is simply not there yet. So an example of this with regard to electronic warfare, we do have some capability in Europe. The 2nd Cavalry Regiment, through their exercises, is working with this equipment. But we're still learning how we're going to fight in the electromagnetic spectrum. What's really encouraging, and I was in Europe about 3 weeks ago, is we've got leaders down at even the company and platoon level that are really trying to think through not only how do we employ the equipment, but how do we fight in the electromagnetic spectrum. So what's happened with regard to that fight or that dilemma for our leaders at all levels is it's much different from what we may have experienced in Iraq or Afghanistan. In Iraq and Afghanistan, when we went outside the wire, we turned on our system, our crew system, and when we came back in, we turned it off. That's all we had to do. And we knew that there had been some work done to make sure that it didn't interfere with radios and that sort of thing, but that's all we had to do. Now, what someone chooses to do, what a leader chooses to do with regard to the electromagnetic spectrum really depends on a variety of factors. It's much more complex, and it has to do with being able to understand what the threat is, to know where it is, and then to figure out what collection of capabilities or combination of capabilities is appropriate to achieve the commander's intent. And that is a level of complexity that is far beyond anything that we have recent experience with regard to electromagnetic warfare. The same sort of thing for positioning, navigation, and timing. The idea there is to be able to operate in a GPS contested or a GPS denied environment. There is technology out there that allows us to do that. We are heavily dependent, obviously, on the network. We're not trying to move away from the network. We're trying to enable the network in a contested environment. With regard to sustainment, we're mindful of expeditionary operations and the cost constraints that are required. We know that we can't rely on an army of field support representatives, FSRs, to make things work. So how do we strike that balance? Again, our Army RCO is still fairly young. We're about 10 months old. We believe that the way we need to proceed will look very similar to how we work, for example, with an urgent material release with an added emphasis, though, on partnerships across the acquisition and operational communities. We are partnering with other organizations out there that have similar goals. One example is the Defense Innovation Unit Experimental, in particular their Silicon Valley office, to figure out what sort of things that they have done predominantly for the special operations community might be applied across the entire Army. Also partnering with the DoD Strategic Capability Office to figure out what sort of approaches that they have examined may be applicable for the greater Army, and we may be able to accelerate on a larger scale. I mentioned earlier that we work with the PMs and the Lifecycle Management Commands as we go, so they're involved from the very beginning. We understand that the prototypes that we use will inform and may even become formal programs of record. So it's critical that we think through the sustainment piece from the very beginning, and that we have our partners in the logistics community with us working hand in hand from the very beginning. One example of how we are not that different process-wise from some of the typical processes that the Army uses. We still are using safety confirmations or safety releases from ATEC, the Army Test Evaluation Command, and urgent material releases from Army Material Command before we field a prototype. So there is some level of risk in fielding an 80% solution, but we do have some protocols we've got to follow to make sure that we don't assume excessive amounts of risk. I think probably the best way to describe the sustainment approach, it's tailored logistics support that we're pursuing in the initial fieldings, working through the field service representatives and leveraging the existing Army field support brigades that are in theater. And again, was just in Europe about 3 weeks ago, sitting down with them, making sure that we can actually pull off what we say we're going to do. We have leveraged the facilities in Vilsec and Grafenwehr to be able to provide the equipment as we go forward. And so I talked about electronic warfare. I talked about positioning, navigation, and timing. There are other domains in which we may expand. Leadership will make decisions on those. One of the things that Army RCO does is we have an organization called the Emerging Technologies Office. The Emerging Technologies Office does two things. It's looking at friendly technologies that may be developing that we wearing a uniform might not have perfect visibility of or awareness of. That's why partnerships with folks like DIUX are extremely important. They're also looking at threat technologies that may be evolving or may be changing, so that 5 years from now we don't end up in the same sort of position we're in now, where our focus was elsewhere and we get surprised by a threat capability that develops. So that's it in a nutshell. I will hold my remarks there and look forward to any questions that you may have. Sir?
Thanks, Al. Our next speaker to General Shoffner's right is Mr. Chris Lowman, no stranger to this audience if you've been to these sessions before. Chris is currently serving as Acting Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. In this role, Mr. Lowman advises the ASALT while leading and supervising Army acquisition, procurement, research and development, and logistics efforts. He also oversees the development of policies, programs, and processes to streamline Army acquisition efforts. Mr. Lowman has had numerous key assignments in logistics during his more than 28 years of service. Before this current detail he's serving in now, he was the Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition Policy and Logistics, and prior to that, Director of Maintenance Policy, Programs and Processes for the U.S. Army G4, in fact, worked for me. And then prior to that, was Chief of Supply and Maintenance at Headquarters, U.S. Army Europe. Mr. Lowman.
Thanks, sir. So like my fellow panelists, is this on? Yeah?
I think you're on.
Okay, so like my fellow panelists, I want to say thanks for the invitation, the opportunity to talk to you. So I'm serving as the Principal Deputy in an acquisition organization. Think about that for a minute. I'm the first logistician to hold this job, and I'm proud of that. I think it's a testament to how acquisition views sustainment and the importance that we place on initial planning and design for product support strategies. So as I was listening to everybody else, I'm looking out at the crowd, and I see an awful lot of familiar faces. Most of the folks out there, whether you're in uniform or out, I've worked for at one point or another, or worked with, and you've labored mightily to impart some knowledge on me. So the only reason I bring that up is I really stand on a foundation laid down by logisticians that are serving today and those that served in the past. And I hope you hear echoes in my comments of the work that you started years ago. So I want to talk to you a little bit about 3 topics. One, how we are linking acquisition decisions in the upfront acquisition cycle with sustainment performance of those weapon systems that we're fielding. So processes we're going through right now, whether it's governance, policy, or design work, and how we're teaming with the sustainment community. The second topic is how we are enabling diagnosis and repair in theater for weapon systems that are in production today. So these are things like CBM Plus and Store and Forward, what we're doing with that information, how we're moving the data. And then the last one is really, and it was brought up by General Pegee, is really how we are going to live within and operate within a very data-rich environment. And we're on the cusp, 85% fielded in GCSS Army, and the decisions we're going to make to manage readiness in a theater of operations as opposed to react to readiness. So I think those 3 will be enough, and I welcome any questions at the end. So first, linking acquisition decisions. So as most of you know, we spend an awful lot of time thinking about sustainment during the acquisition cycle, whether that's pre-milestone A, B, or C. Those thoughts and design efforts are codified in what we call a life cycle sustainment plan. And so historically, that particular document, while it is a milestone decision, a mandatory milestone decision document, so it's something that has to be complete in order for a program to advance, we've not really paid a lot of attention to it once we went into a production environment and fielded, right? It was really the upfront, it was our upfront thinking and design work. Once we got that milestone C, or a full rate production decision, everybody's focus then turns on to production, delivery, and fielding. And we really don't reflect back on, hey, all of the work we did designing a product support strategy, how is it actually performing? What lessons can we learn? Right? And so we're doing a few things. One, we're working with OSD to redesign the process we go through to design a product support strategy. We're linking the decisions we're making in that document to sustainment outcomes. How are we doing that? One, we're tying all of the statements that we're making, which are design statements, right? I'm going to have organic repair, I'm going to have organic depot maintenance, or CLS contracts, or soldier maintenance, or civilian maintenance on the battlefield. All of those are design characteristics of a product support strategy. All of those now have to be tied to a contract deliverable in that document. So we assure ourselves, not only are we thinking about it, but we're buying it and we'll deliver it. The second thing we're doing is we're taking a look at the requirements that our capability developers, TRADOC in this case, outline for us in terms of product support strategy performance characteristics. What are my supply availability measures? What are my mean time to repair? How maintainable should the system be? How reliable? How available? All of those things drive product support decisions and design characteristics. We're linking those requirements, documenting how they perform in test. So how do they perform in the test environment? And we've created what we're calling an operational sustainment review that I host at my level. That's at 3-star level. Every 5 years after a weapon system is fielded, we're bringing all systems back into the building, and we're reviewing all of those integrated product support elements. What did the Army demand of us in terms of design work and performance? How did it perform in test? And then finally, how is it actually proving out in the operational environment? That's proving to be a very powerful governance body. And I'll just give you a quick example. I hosted one on Excalibur yesterday. So this is one of our precision guided artillery rounds. We're about 7 years in to production on that particular weapon system. It's performing well in the theater. The theater is consuming them. That particular artillery round was treated as an artillery round when we bought it, right? It's a wooden round. We didn't anticipate any maintenance on it. We anticipated producing it, buying it, and storing it, and using it, right? 7 years later, some of those assumptions are proving to be false. That particular round has software embedded in it. So we have a software maintenance requirement on Excalibur. So we went through this. Yesterday. We directed that we're going to review that product support strategy and keep an eye on the lessons learned in Excalibur as we advance into the PGK and follow on tube-launched precision-guided munitions, right? We can't treat them as wooden rounds anymore. These are actually maintainable pieces of equipment now. There's a data port on that round. So what I asked the team to look at yesterday was, you know what, we ought to spec that data port. We ought to deviate from our performance, our normal reliance on performance specifications where we allow an OEM to define if it's meeting a performance level. And we ought to spec that data port because that data port mates up to a cable, and that cable mates up to some kind of programmable device. What I don't want to have happen is once we have 4 different programmable rounds in a fires battalion, that I have 4 cables, 4 programmable devices, onward and so forth. So we're learning a lot from looking at ourselves and really demanding that pulling that thread all the way through. Okay, second one, CBM Plus and JLTV. So CBM Plus, this is how we're enabling maintenance in theater. And this is really about, if you look at our production programs today, whether it's Abrams, Bradley, Stryker, these are legacy platforms that we're modernizing. We're embedding into those platforms health monitoring subsystems. So this is capturing usage, diagnostic data, as well as parametric engineering data, temperature, speed, G-forces through turns, whatever it might be, and enabling, off-ramping that data to our maintainers, either at the unit level for the battalion maintenance officer to use, or all the way up, to begin developing corrective action and determining whether we are, in fact, if we have maintenance problems, if we have tech data documentation problems, obsolescence problems, or reliability issues. And the last one I want to just spend a minute on, ERP and fleet management. So we have GCSS Army, 85% fielded today. GCSS Army is going to provide a level of data that we have never had in the United States Army before. But I tell you, regardless of the generation, every logistician has always talked about and aspired to have. And that is an ability to see ourselves down to the individual asset level over time, how often that particular asset is available to be missioned, how much money I'm spending on it, and how much maintenance labor I'm expending on it, and being able to compare that to a return on investment in terms of availability, right? So what we're on the cusp of here, I believe, is enabling a fleet manager at the sustainment level within our Army Material Command to begin pushing assets to the unit as soon as they detect that there's a bad performing asset within their particular formation. So historically, we react to a readiness problem, and what we're on the cusp of here, and what we're working with Army Material Command in terms of fleet management is allowing them to shift from Class 7 item management to now beginning to push assets to the line and say, look, Commander, as soon as you receive this tank, I need you to turn in serial number 1 because it's not giving you an appropriate amount of availability or combat power commensurate with the amount of investment you're making in it in terms of money and manpower. And so I'll just stop there.
Thanks, Chris. We have one more panel member to the far right, Joshua Marcuse. Joshua is the Executive Director of the Defense Innovation Board. He works with the chairman, Director Dr. Eric Schmidt, and Secretary Carter's team to establish the board a year ago, and prior to that, he worked on the Force for the Future task force and stood up an innovation unit in OSD policy. Josh has worked at CFR, CSIS, and Booz Allen, and serves on several boards to include the Defense Entrepreneurs Forum. So here's a completely different thinker who's going to stimulate your thoughts and questions with some ideas that might get your juices flowing. Josh.
Great, thank you so much for having me, and I feel very appreciative. I'm a customer of the services provided by everyone on this table. I'm a new homeowner, and I go to Home Depot, and as an American citizen, I benefit from the Army every day. And I'm not a logistics, sustainment, or acquisition expert, but I am really, really lucky. I get to follow around Eric Schmidt and a bunch of other entrepreneurs and founders, academics, software developers, some of the smartest people in the world looking at the future, and follow them around their visits to about 36 different locations around the world where the Department of Defense is doing its job. And a lot of those involve logistics, including going to visit Transcom. And we got to visit Army depots in CENTCOM in theater and see them up close and talk to the enlisted folks and the leaders that are sustaining and maintaining these resources. So we got to see it up close. And I have some reflections and observations, and I want to share with you about that. So first slide, please. So one of the things that I've come, next slide, please. Okay. Great. One of the things I've come to appreciate is the unique role culturally, as well as in terms of the proficiency and professionalism of the Army, is that what I think they do is to really tame the vastness of industrial war. And you think about, someone mentioned Clausewitz earlier, you think about the centuries in which the notion of the modern nation state fighting another modern nation state has evolved into what I think we saw at the pinnacle of the Second World War. And the values and the beliefs, and frankly, a lot of the processes, and in some cases, the actual equipment from the Second World War still appears to be in operation today. And so the problem is that we are optimized for that. And next slide, please, is that actually may not be serving us very well when we talk about what we think the fight with the near-peer competitor will look like. And I applaud the RCO, and everywhere we go, including to the Hill, we talk about things that we think are bright stars in the horizon for the Department of Defense. We talk about all the Rapid Capabilities Offices and DIUX and SCO and DARPA. We think those things are wonderful. But the reality is they represent a very tiny sliver of what we spend and how we train our people and what we reward. It's a very small piece. It is a vision of the future, but it is not the present. And so that lack of evolution is a serious concern. Next slide, please. Because I believe that everything that we need to know about the future of logistics is captured in the essence of this slide. And the reason is because when we talk about a vision of autonomous delivery of drones, when we talk about integrating in this data-rich environment and instrumenting all these individual assets, when we talk about generating all this data, ultimately it is the ability to make sense of and use that data that is going to matter. And so what I would challenge all of you to think about is when you imagine what it is that you believe your job is in logistics, is to think about not moving people and stuff, but you're moving data, right? That's what you are actually charged with to do in the future. Soon, I hope, we will have a vision of how to 3D print everything that our service members will need. But that means that what you're moving is that data file, right? And you're figuring out how to move the data. The physical manifestation, the actual part, is commodified. In the same way that you see in the commercial world, the actual compute power, the machine, the computer itself, the laptop, is just a commodity. They're interchangeable. We don't really care very much about the specs, and we expect to change them out every year, right? We have a constant refresh rate because you have new improvement all the time. What is crucial to the operation of that commodity is the data that it enables. So what you're doing when you're imagining a world in which things are, you have on-site generation of the parts that you need, the sustainment, the food, the water, the blood, all the things you're talking about. It's really about how do we think about the way that that data-rich environment is mastered by, lived in, breathing in the air they breathe for our service members. And you think about what is the personnel system you need to have that kind of operator, it looks pretty different than the present. looks pretty different than the present. So really, we need to think about the future of the U.S. military as a software company, because it is software that manages all of that data. And I hate to say it, but when you think about needing one perfect system, some ERP, that is going to ingest all this data and spit out the right answer, that is the state of the art in the late 1990s, right? That was what you should have aspired to when I was in high school. The future is not that at all. It's actually the boutique that you think is what you don't need is what you need, right? It's the ability to have any service member have a quick contract with any software company to build an app in a couple of weeks that taps into that data and gives that user what they need in their unique context, right? You should imagine the ability to refactor those apps on the fly all the time. Anything that takes 5 to 7 years is not the answer, right? If it has to be a program of record, it's not the answer. The program of record is the enemy of innovation. Anything that you can't start spending money on in 2 years is obsolete before delivered. If it takes 2 or 3 years to figure out how to design the requirements for this thing, it's already too late. It's a totally different way of thinking about how to generate combat power. It's a different way of how to think about sustainment and maintenance. And it is wonderful that there are pictures of drones everywhere in the slides here, but how many drones are fielded? When do you believe that's going to be normal? It's great to say that every maintainer should have the manual on their iPhone, but why don't they? I used my iPhone while I was sitting in the audience to see how many manuals I could pull up for free on Google Play, and I found a couple for how to maintain an Apache. I mean, this is something you could do tomorrow, and probably should. Next slide, please. So I would submit that the parallelism between what the modern company like Home Depot does today and what you do for the American people and for the Army are very similar. If you are trying to figure out how do you maintain always-on service for Amazon, for any customer anywhere in the world, right, and how they manage all of that data, it is through cloud computing. And the virtue of cloud computing is the ability to scale up and scale down, right? They can generate more compute power, or in our case, combat power, dynamically. And I think that is the analogous model for what you want for the future of logistics, the ability to scale dynamically, increasingly constrained not by physics, but by data, by the ability to move bits and bytes, not boxes. And so the way in which you achieve that is by thinking of how do you create changes in the digital world that have physical manifestations. And that is about how you understand what it is that you need to build and where it needs to appear, and thinking about moving those files and the ability to have that adaptation in your environment where you know how to turn a file into the effect that you want to see. That is a much, much easier problem to solve than how to move all the water and all the fuel and all the parts and all the trucks and all the trucks parts and all the people that know how to install them. And it means thinking about a different kind of time horizon and a way of embracing complexity instead of trying to conquer complexity through simplicity. Simplicity is not the solution, right? So what we really need to do is actually not try to reduce everything to being alike, but embrace the fact that they're all going to be different. And this gets to the beginning of my remarks, which was when we talk about conquering or taming the vastness of war, it comes to what we believe was the signal insight of the industrial model by Edward Deming, when he said that variation is the enemy of quality. And when we understood that variation was the enemy of quality, we believed that the way to achieve quality was through consistency, to make everything the same. But because of the data richness that we have, we don't need to make everything the same. We now, with a push of a button, can appreciate everything that is unique about each individual item and each individual person. And we can actually give all of that work and all of that effort to the computer, right? We can let the computer solve and resolve all of the complexity. And we can allow the human being to make the decisions, use human judgment, the things that artificial intelligence are not yet very good at doing in context. And we can allow the artificial intelligence to do the part that it's best at. And that is not trying to treat everything like it has to be alike, but appreciate the ability to generate interoperability because we have an infinite ability to appreciate distinctions. That is what the move from industrial to digital gives us. the ability to appreciate an infinite amount of detail and variation in each individual thing. So to use a concrete example we just heard, the hardware that connects the port on the round, right, that needs to be the same because you have to physically insert object A into object B. Everything else about that transaction should be ultimately variable and open, right? So that when you think about, how we're going to assume the point that pretty soon every single part that is issued to a soldier is going to have some form of data port in it. It's probably all going to be some sort of wireless technology, but they're all going to be able to talk to each other in a giant combat Internet of Things, right? And so what we want is the ability for those things to communicate with each other infinitely extensively. And the good news is that the software community that we hang out with in Silicon Valley is able to do that for you right now. I was at Amazon yesterday talking to an incubator called Decode 42. I met 10 companies in 1 hour, and they all think like this, right? This is the state of the art. The challenge, and I'll close with this, the challenge is not technical. The challenge is in this room. I'll be very honest with you. The first thing that Eric Schmidt said after spending a week in the Department of Defense is that the Department of Defense does not have an innovation problem. It has an innovation adoption problem. The issue is with the bureaucracy or the culture or the FAR or the Hill or any number of things that we've been told are the barriers. But the reality is that you need to think about how we talk about risk, right? We are all afraid of the risk of a protest, the risk of a failure, the risk that we haven't met a safety criteria or passed a test or that, a Nunn-McCurdy breach. These are all risks that we manage, but those aren't the risks that matter. The risks that matter are the people that we're supplying. Those are the customer, right? So when we think about risk reduction, I hope we balance operational risk versus bureaucratic risk. And I would submit that the bureaucratic risks are the ones that all of us should take every single day in order to reduce the operational risk to the men and women who are in harm's way. Thank you very much.
And ask each person to answer one of their questions. So I think they all heard me up here. I'm not going to repeat that. General Hurley, your first question.
All right, thanks, sir. So I had a flurry of questions about additive manufacturing, and so they all center around a couple of issues. The first issue is where do we stand on the implementing guidance and policies? And so in the cause of being brutally honest, I would tell you in this particular topic, we are in a position where the technology leaped in front of our intellectual discourse, which is precisely where we do not want to be. So rather than identifying emerging technology and having that intellectual discourse to identify where we could leverage that technology, we're now in a position where that technology exists, it's proliferated, you spend a couple $1,000s, you've got that capability at the tactical level. And so you're in the position of having to implement policies that prohibit use in certain areas because our soldiers have already found how to use it well. And I'll give you an example of how, a policy that we need to implement is, so do you want a piece of Class 9 that's manufactured locally with this technology on helicopters flying in the air? And if the answer is, well, there's a certain level of quality control that you need to implement, then we need a policy out there that prohibits the use of this technology for aviation parts. So what we need to do, and the last two speakers alluded to it, and Mr. Lowman specifically mentioned it, is that we need to design into the combat systems the ability to leverage this technology to fully leverage its potential. And we've not necessarily pushed that thought all the way back to concept development and design implementation. So the next related question is, at what level do we think that this technology, additive manufacturing or 3D printing, will be implemented? And I would submit to you it's probably at all three levels. At their strategic level, certainly, when we're designing additive manufacturing into our weapon systems to improve or maintain combat power. At the operational level, we got to, if the multi-domain battle characteristics are such that you are operating in a vastly decentralized environment, in an austere environment, then you want to limit the log tail of the BCTs. So then at the operational level, you need to decide how much of this capability do you want in sustainment brigades, ESCs, and TSCs to provide that over-the-horizon logistics support to distributed operations. And then lastly, at the tactical level, as I mentioned before, the soldiers in the BCTs and the soldiers in the maintenance units, they know how to use this technology. And so I think there's a lot of potential there to eliminate, in some cases, eliminate the supply chain and locally manufacture parts as needed.
Thanks, Paul. Mark.
Okay, received a question. What is the secret to being able to anticipate, underline anticipate, demand? Any tips for how the Army can improve in this area? My answer might disappoint given the emphasis on anticipate, but I'm still going to give it. And that is the number one thing I think we can do to improve our response to demand is to reduce the lead time of our product arrival, and that includes perhaps most importantly our decision lead time. When we make decisions too soon on where our inventory needs to go, we put it in the wrong place. If we make the decision at the last moment that we can practically make it, then we make a much better decision because we have the information. Can't make the decision too late because you miss it, but how do you reduce the lead time of the process to get product where it needs to go, and how do you reduce the lead time of decision making about that? One component on that is to make decisions simpler to make. It's very difficult, one fact about Home Depot stores, and you might not believe this, but 70% of the products that are sold in a Home Depot store, about 30,000 stock keeping units, 70% of those sell less than 1 unit per store per week. So it's a store of slow-moving items. Very difficult to predict demand when demand comes in fractional weeks sales. But if I aggregate that demand to 100 stores, I can actually make pretty good decisions about what's going to sell in 100 stores. So creating a rapid deployment capability where I can rapidly make decisions on what bring in product for 100 stores and then rapidly make decisions on where to put that inventory, reducing the lead time, I can make a better quality decision and anticipate, react to the demand that way, reducing the need to anticipate demand. What I would say, to not fully ignore the question of anticipating demand, planning and forecasting obviously is a key part of this. There are routine products in our store, not too weather related, that sell just on a routine basis. We use available algorithmic processes for that. It's really enabled though by central automated replenishment. At one point in time, our store associates ordered product for the store. We realized that we could centralize that process, make it a math-based process, and do that much better, and we've improved our in-stock and inventory turns as a result of that. There's other products, though, in our store that aren't so routine. There's events. If you think about what's happening right now, we're going to be setting holiday not too far from now. All the Christmas trees and Christmas decorations and that sort of thing, holiday decorations of all kinds. That's a very merchant-oriented program. We decide what we're going to sell way in advance, but then we plant that in the right stores, and then we fast response our replenishment in for those items. Work closely with our merchants and what they expect to sell, and determine where that inventory needs to be and when. And then there's other types of demand which might be weather-driven demand. I get more phone calls, emails, text messages from college buddies about how poor I'm doing my job at times when ice melt is needed, or air conditioning. It's an incredibly hot period in Boston, and how do we get ice melt to the right places at the right time during the ice storm? How do we get air conditioners to the right place during the heat wave. Again, fast response is absolutely the key to this, putting inventory, staging inventory in the right places, and then quickly responding when you have those things, because you'll never put it in the right place if you make the decision too far in advance.
Thanks, Mark. I just wish General Perna had been here to hear your remarks. General Perna commands the Army Materiel Command and has challenged each of his Life Cycle Management Command, his inventory control points, to achieve 100% supply availability, which in your business, I know you can appreciate how difficult that's going to be. General Shoffner.
So the question I'll tackle here is, what logistics enablers is the RCO working on? To be clear, we've been resourced for electronic warfare and the position navigation and timing so far, looking at other areas where we may expand. But on the EW and the P&T piece, I just want to point out that that's not restricted to combat units and combat vehicles only. And I would argue that the ability for our logistics formations to be able to operate across the electromagnetic spectrum as well as be able to navigate is equally, if not more critical than our maneuver force's ability to operate in that environment. So the two go hand in hand, and we had to start somewhere. We started with 2CR, but we will look to figure out how we need to expand that across the Army. There's a key part of this, and that is the .mil-PF analysis that has to occur. We talked about the importance of TRADOC being involved in that from the beginning, the Centers of Excellence, making sure that they've got the requirements right from the beginning, and that we go back and challenge and adjust those requirements as time goes on. Leader following autonomous vehicles, I think, is a very exciting area. In fact, I was just at TARDEC yesterday taking a look at the work they've done. They do have some prototypes on those. They are close to being, able to be put out there. Some things that we need to think through with regard to use of autonomous vehicles. I won't get into that today. I think the big idea, though, is this. If we look at the fact that, and I think we all realize this, we have assumed some risk in the Army with regard to sustainment, in particular ammunition haul capability. So if you look at how we mitigate that risk, one way would be to make force structure changes. Those will take some time, and there probably aren't going to be more than, well, let's just say, not massive increases in capacity in the next few years. So what we want are those kind of solutions that'll give us a dramatic leap in capabilities. The autonomous vehicles would be one. Another one would just be to use current capabilities in a different manner. Let me give you a couple of recent examples. We recently fired HIMARS rockets off of a barge. Think about the application there with regard to multi-domain battle. Interestingly, on that one, the hardest thing and the reason it took so long to get it done was the legal implications of maritime law by firing rockets off of a ship at sea. If we think about the anti-armor problem, I talked about the advances our adversaries have made. The traditional approach might be to figure out, how much rolled homogeneous armor do we need to be able to defend our combat vehicles against some of these systems, anti-tank guided missiles in particular. Well, what if we could have a different way of detecting where those systems were, those anti-tank guided missiles, and either defeat or disable them through electronic attack or perhaps directed energy. That might be a way that not only do we mitigate the risk, but we also ease our logistics burden, because I don't need necessarily to have a kinetic kill against that system if I can defeat it in a electronic means. Thank you.
Thanks, Al. Chris.
So the first question I'll tackle is the amount of data coming off of CBM-enabled platforms, and the question really gets after commanders having an understanding of what to do with that data and how it can enable their operations. And so this is not a problem that is new to us as we continue to expand the amount of CBM-enabled vehicles. And so I mentioned Abrams, Bradley, Stryker, and our primary combat platforms, all of which will be enabled with a vehicle health monitoring subsystem. JLTV it's designed in, so it's coming off the production line with CBM Plus. this is really about echeloning the data, right? Understanding at each echelon what data is needed to answer the questions specific to that particular echelon. So a battalion maintenance officer has much different data requirements than perhaps an engineer in one of the research and development centers trying to understand how something is operating in terms of temperature, in terms of vibration. And so this is really, the CBM Plus data as well as the GCSS Army data is really about echeloning, right? And so the efforts we're going through now is identifying what data is needed, what questions do they have to answer at each echelon, whether it's the battalion, the corps, the division, at the theater level, or up at the sustainment level. And then how to display that data. So what business intelligence layer needs to be on top of this ocean of data that these weapon systems are generating and will continue to generate, and how do I display it, right? And gear that business intelligence to display the information to the echelon that needs it. And that's really the work that our gang down at CASCOM, in coordination with General McGee and his group, as we're going through development of the business intelligence layer for GCSS Army. All of that, we believe, enables a commander to use the data that he needs, when he needs it, and that the platform's supplying it.
Thanks, Chris. Josh?
Answer this one pretty quickly. So the question was, how would the Army keep up with the state of the art in microprocessing or whatever these different technologies are? And I would offer sort of 4 suggestions. How to keep, actually, forgive me. The question was how to keep up with the state of the art with our current acquisition process. So I said, first, I would avoid the acquisition process whenever possible in the short term. And I would work with our friend to the left at places like RCO and REF, and I would try to work that problem. But then, of course, that's a short-term problem. The longer-term fix is we need to work with the Hill to redefine the way that we purchase stuff. There should be a completely separate process for software acquisition. There should be a separate process for software that's embedded in these programs, and we shouldn't think about trying to use the acquisition process to purchase the stuff that is state-of-the-art. That's not what it's for. Acquisition process is really, really, really important when you're purchasing something like an aircraft carrier or a nuclear submarine or something really, really big, really complicated that costs billions of dollars, that takes 10 years to build and should be in service for 50 years. A shrinking number of things that we buy will fit that category, and we should have a different process for buying those things that is purpose-built for achieving that outcome. But obviously I know there's limitations there. So when you have to use the acquisition process, I would say, first of all, the government should always own the code. We should never ask our friends in industry to simply deliver a product without us being able to understand what's underneath it. And then we should have our own software developers. Chris, my solution to your data problem is I would just have software developers for every commander, and they would write the apps they need, and you would provide all the data. And you wouldn't worry about how to define what you think the business intelligence UX should be. I would let every leader choose their own UX. I think it would be cheaper to just have a competition for app developers to say, here is all of our data or a copy of some of our unclassified data, and you tell me what you think the app should look like. So I might try that approach. And we should be able to modify that code whenever we need to. And I think, one of the things that we hear when we go down range, people say, every year, I put in my list of software change requests, and, 2 years later, I get, 10% of the things we asked for changed. Well, I don't think we would ever tolerate that from Home Depot. Home Depot would never expect us to tolerate that. We would go somewhere else. And the other thing I'd say is buy everything as a service whenever possible. So whenever you can get a company to sell you a platform as a service or software as a service or anything as a service, I think that allows you to remain at the state of the art while they're doing all the work and you're riding the wave of the improvements they're making for the commercial customers. And the last thing is, as much as possible, treat the state of the art itself as a commodity and just figure out you're going to trade these out. So if we are building 1,000 of something and we build 200 a year, by year 4, it should be a very different product. We should be learning from each block all the time. And so that's some of the benefits you get from that commodification.
Very good answer. Thanks, Josh. Okay, I think we've got enough time for another round, so Paul, lead us off.
All right, mine will be quick. This question is an interesting question with a political twist, and this is why I chose it. You echoed Lieutenant General Pegue's sentiments that the Army expects to operate on a consistent basis in a degraded and austere operational environment. Is this an operational strategy the Army desires, or is it a function of the political reality of a reduced footprint in the COCOMs? All right, so what we have to understand here is we have to understand our peer competitor capabilities. And I would tell you that our dominance across all of these different domains, in some cases, are there by a slim margin. In other cases, we've already lost dominance. So that's the kind of enemy that we're planning against. And the degraded, austere conditions that we're talking about are a direct reflection of the agile, decentralized, hyper-lethal operations that we will have to employ in a multi-domain battle environment. It's a matter of survival, not a matter of politics. And that's something that we need to relearn the muscle memory, as we talked about, and leverage emerging technologies to give us the agility that we'll need to survive.
Thanks, Paul. You know, I think what General Milley is probably talking about is that all of these nice-to-have things that we kind of developed over the 15 years of OIF and OEF consume logistics energy. I can remember in Desert Storm when General McCaffrey, the division commander, outlawed the use of ice while we were sitting in the middle of the desert in Saudi Arabia. Forbid us to use ice. Not because he was a mean, cranky old son of a gun, which he was, but because he understood the implications of that on the logistics system in the division. And so, when we put up Burger Kings and Baskin Robbins in the theater of operations, there's a whole supply chain that feeds that's consuming space that we probably need for other more important things. Anyway, I'll get off that soapbox. Mark.
Great. The question I received was, does Home Depot use an off-the-shelf ERP, SAP, Oracle, et cetera? Why or why not? It's a great question. When I joined Home Depot about 11 years ago, we were in the middle of what we called a core retail implementation of SAP. And we delivered on that. We implemented that in our Canadian division. And our Canadian division, around 150 stores or so. We did that implementation, and we realized we wanted no part of that in the U.S. Implementing that across 1,900 or so stores because of the disruption and difficulty it takes to get from here to there on that, and the business case of the value that we would get to with that. We do use packaged software, and I have to admit, I spent 6 years of my career working for a warehouse management systems company, so I have a background in selling, supporting packaged software used in logistics execution systems. What I would tell you today, we use those packaged software systems similar to that here at the Home Depot. What I would say is we develop further, and we get larger, frankly. What we realize is that the packaged software out there on the marketplace doesn't necessarily meet our needs. We at the Home Depot are advancing further, and we think we're several standard deviations away from the mean in terms of where we are. And those packaged software companies shoot for kind of that mean. So increasingly we're finding, and particularly for software that interacts with the customer or is mission critical to serving our customers, we find that increasingly we're developing that software in-house for our specialized needs as we work to differentiate ourselves from other retailers. And just to wrap that question up, one thing I would say is the head of supply chain at the Home Depot, we've asked our suppliers to let us know when they're going through major software implementations, among those the name brand software that was mentioned in the question. And with that, we asked them to let us know that so that we can protect against the disruption that's likely to lead to. And in fact, we buy inventory in advance of that, expecting disruption, and too often we find that that's the case, that there is disruption in that supply chain as they go through that. And they do have a great deal of difficulty in moving through that. So They are very difficult to do the big time ERP conversion, and not sure that for very specialized needs, they meet all of the needs.
That's a very interesting response. I asked the same question to Walmart as I visited them years ago, and I got a similar response, that they determined that it was just too hard for what they needed to do, and that what they had was working just fine. Al?
So the question is the RCO working on anything to help us figure out how to sustain non-programs of record? Life cycle sustainment is a challenge for non-programs of record. So the answer is yes, but it's a little bit more complicated than I first realized. And I think I'll approach this by talking about it in time. So we have a phased approach to this when we have perceived a capability gap. And the first phase, at least so far, has been to use existing technology, existing equipment, combine it in such a way that it gives you a capability you did not have previously. I'm going to give you one example of this, and it's a system that we currently have two of in Europe. It's called the CEMIC, the Counter UAS Mobile Integrated Capability. What we did here is we took a Stryker fire support vehicle, we added electronic warfare capability, that's both electronic attack and electronic support, so the ability to emit and then to detect what the threat might be doing. We added the lightweight counter-mortar radar, the Q-53 on a Humvee, and we integrated the optics on the system that already existed, integrated all that stuff together, and we actually came up with two slightly different variants of it, and we pushed it out to the 2nd Cavalry Regiment. So that's an example of what's possible, taking existing equipment, integrating it in such a way that it gives you a capability you didn't have before. So, have we assumed some costs there in terms of non-programs of record? We have to a degree, but I think it's not a massive amount. Not only that, there are only two systems, so we haven't spent a whole lot of money. And so I would say, yeah, we're assuming some risk, but it is fairly manageable risk. It's only in a specific theater, and it's only two vehicles so far. If we were to scale that up, then I think the question becomes even more critical. So the other thing that we're realizing is until the programs of record come online, it may be several years. It could be 10 years, 11 years before that program of record comes online. So the example I cited, that CEMIC vehicle, that's an initial capability, fairly limited in terms of what it can do. So really, not only is there a need to do something like that CEMIC vehicle, there's a need for another step, an interim capability that we haven't yet figured out. So there's two ways I think we'll approach that. One is for that interim capability, we pull from the program of record or take elements from the program of record and get it in the field faster. And the idea there would be it's going to become part of the program of record eventually, so let's use it and let that inform the program of record. The other one, and this is the tough one, and obviously we haven't, as has been talked about, we haven't spent all that much money yet, is being able to say we're going down the wrong path and we need something different. If we would invest a lot of money, that's hard to do. When I talked to our folks on the Hill about how to approach this, their counsel to me was, it's okay to be able to come back to us and say we're not going to do this, but we need to have not spent too much money when we come to that realization. Obviously, we don't have a great track record of that, but that's, I think, some of the tough decisions that are going to need to be made if we, realize that we need to go in a different direction from what had been previously decided upon. Thanks.
Thanks, Al. Chris, your next question.
Sir, I was going to reserve that last 35 seconds for you.
No, we've got some time for it.
So I got a question on considering design for sustainment as a standard KPP. That's a key performance parameter. It might take a while. So today, OSD does have a sustainment KPP. It's comprised of availability, cost, and reliability. And I can tell you the challenge here is, so the answer to this question is, am I considering it? Yes, it's OSD policy, right? Easy. The challenge here is how we apply that and what we apply it to. The more KPPs we throw on these programs, the more KSAs we throw on these programs, while very important, drive schedule, drive test, and drive cost, right? So we have to be very judicious how we apply these things and at what level we apply these things. What we found over the last several years, especially as we wandered into more of a commercial technology basis, we were mandating reliability for things that were commercial off the shelf. And I can tell you in our PEO CSCSS, when the Army wants to buy 400 chainsaws, we flip through a catalog, meets all of our requirements, we pick the Sears chainsaw and we buy 400. Don't put Home Depot. We go to Home Depot and we buy 400 chainsaws. Don't put a reliability KSA on there or a KPP, right? Because that chainsaw is inherently, it has whatever reliability is coming from the manufacturer. And so what we found is we were entering into programs where we were trying to improve the commercial product such that we could meet a reliability KPP, right? Or we were trying to test it, right? And so what I would tell you is sustainment as a KPP is important. What you choose in terms of availability, reliability, maintainability, we think is very important, and how our capability development community sets those thresholds such that they're achievable and evolutionary, right? Perhaps I don't want to design and build the most available piece of equipment in the first iteration because I can achieve that in 2 or 3 iterations later, and so I grow into that reliability over time, right? I think our overriding concern is not to slow down delivery of the capability to the soldier, but get it out, design, make those important decisions up front that I can't change later on, but set those thresholds that are achievable that we can begin fielding capabilities. That's it.
On my watch, we've got 1 minute left. By that clock, I'm 2 minutes over. I got 1 minute. Josh, you want to take it?
Yes, I'll be very, very brief, and I just want to start by saying, Chris, hats off to you for saying that, because the number of requirements is inversely proportionate to innovation. So less requirements, more flexibility between requirements, empowering managers to make trade-offs between requirements is a really important piece. So I'll be really short, but I did get a great question I want to answer. Given that logistics often has to compete with sexy hardware like tanks, attack helicopters, how do we compete for needed money in the budget to get logistics innovation that's available? So I will 2 quick answers. First, I would team up with combatant commanders who aren't getting the stuff they need or fear they won't get the stuff they need, and I would use them to make your political message. That was probably not a super PC to see saying in the service, but I think they are going to be able to articulate the danger of not having what we need when we need it, and you should get them to articulate that. The second and last thing I'd say is, why is it that you think logistics isn't sexy? Of course it is. You guys have all the drones, the additive manufacturing, the 3D printing, the Internet of Things. You guys have the future at your fingertips. You have companies like Amazon that and Google that everyone in this country admires, and Home Depot, absolutely Home Depot. And you are in many ways the closest thing that we have to that. So don't let anyone convince you that you're not as sexy as Navy SEALs. Logistics is super, super sexy. Super sexy, and you guys should advocate for it with total confidence that this is the future and you should be part of making it.
And on that note, that's the end of this panel.